Meanwhile, there are reports of successful advances by the Syrian army. Government forces capture a strategic town in Syria's southwest. Reports say after nearly 2 months of heavy clashes, the army liberated the town of Khirbet Ghazaleh from insurgents. The town is located near the Jordanian border. Opposition sources say that about 1,000 fighters withdrew from the town after losing hope that backup would come from Jordan. Meanwhile, reports coming out of the country say the Syrian army has stormed Aleppo's countryside to clear the area from insurgents. Well, the Syrian army has also managed to gain control of an important road leading to Aleppo International Airport. The Syrian conflict is currently in its 3rd year. The UN says over 70,000 people have lost their lives. The Syrian government and foreign-backed insurgents blame each other for the unrest and deadly violence. Well, to discuss that a bit further, we're now joined by Mr. Kevin Barrett, who is an author and Middle East expert, who is joining us live now from Madison. Sir, thanks a lot for joining us. Now, how should we assess the current situation of this fight between the Syrian government's forces and these insurgents that have come in from outside?
Well, it seems that in the past month, the war has been increasingly going in favor of the Syrian government, and this seems to be just more confirmation of that. And it's probably good news. I mean, I'm not really a fan of the Syrian government. I think there should be an opening to a new system in Syria, but I do think that this civil war is an absolute tragedy, and it was launched by international bad actors, and it's been carried out primarily by foreign influences that do not have Syria's best interests at stake. So I think the only way out of this situation really is for the Syrian government to continue to make these gains. At some point, it hopefully will reach a point where the Syrian government can reach out to the forces in the opposition that are actually Syrian and that are interested in participating in changing things in Syria peacefully and democratically. And I think that's, I hope, what we're going to be seeing in the not too distant future.
And, Mr. Barrett, recently, obviously, the United States has said that it also wants dialogue, something that the Syrian government has been calling for from day one, really. What has changed now that the U.S. is on side, even now with the Syrian government, in a sense?
Well, maybe the U.S. has come to its senses, although I wouldn't put any serious money on that if I were a gambler, which I'm, of course, not. But it is possible that the U.S. has finally decided to back down from this very short-sighted decision to back this kind of Israeli-Saudi axis. And of course, let's not forget the Qatar people who are trying to enforce regime change in Syria in a very violent and destructive way. And I think it's ultimately the Israelis who are the ones who have been really laying the groundwork for this kind of violence and chaos in Syria. They need to destabilize Syria so they can keep the Golan Heights and try to spread fitna, that is Sunni versus Shia conflict in the Muslim world. And I think the U.S. recognizes, or some people in the U.S. recognize, that it just isn't sensible for the U.S. to be supporting Al-Qaeda forces in Syria. And these are people who are not terribly bright. Many of them have been essentially mercenaries for the U.S. In the past. But they're also people that are really not folks the U.S. should be trying to work with in the long term. So maybe the cooler heads have prevailed. There's always a conflict in these circles of power, and maybe the more sensible people are winning the conflict right now. Let's hope so anyway.
But Mr. Barrett, I wanted to ask you, though, with the presence of Al-Qaeda militants in Syria, are we looking at a future of perpetual chaos, in a sense, for Syria, even if the U.S. has come to its senses?
Well, that's possible. And I think there really needs to be a serious rethinking of the future of Syria. Obviously, the current government cannot really hold on in exactly the same form it is now. But equally obviously, if they were overthrown by this ragged hodgepodge of various mercenary forces and rabid ideologues, that would be even worse. Either way, it's a recipe for perpetual chaos. There needs to be some kind of stepping back from the situation and thinking through how to reunite Syria. And it's going to require some compromises, I think, from the Syrian government and from what we might call the peaceful and loyal Syrian opposition, and even some of the Syrian people.
I do apologize for having to cut you off, Mr. Barrett, but it seems that we have unfortunately run out of time. But of course, we do, as always, appreciate your insight. That was Mr. Kevin Barrett speaking to us live from Madison.